Shalom and welcome to this, our third session. Our third session with our guest for this weekend. And it is indeed an honor and a privilege for me to introduce Rabbi Yaakov Glasser this morning as our scholar in residence. I could tell you about the outstanding role he has played in NCSY, or the myriad programs and activities under his direction as the David Mitzner Dean of the Center for the Jewish Future and University Life at YU. Or I might tell you that it's his humor and his scholarship that make him a much sought-after speaker, both in his local community and elsewhere. After all, how many rabbis get to give their Shabbos Shuvah Drasha twice in the same day? Once to their congregation and a second time to people from other shuls in the community. Or how many rabbis have their keynotes for Tisha B'Av shared over the internet? Having hosted Rabbi Glasser's parents at a Yontif meal this past Rosh Hashanah, I knew we would find his remarks this weekend both spiritually uplifting and additionally enlightening. At the same time, on behalf of Rabbi Yasker, Rabbi Kranzler, and the entire congregation, I wish to extend our sincerest thanks to Charlie Gelfenstein as a patron, to Miriam and Mordechai Burr as sponsors, and to all the many donors for their support, to Ger Schrager, the chair of the House Committee, and to the terrific committee of ladies, Shoshana Kimmel in particular, as well as Harriet Brick, Lori Kaufman, Sally Klein, Arlene Milgram, and Arlene Strauss, whose efforts regarding the arrangements for today's brunch is much appreciated. Please join me in welcoming Rabbi Glasser as he addresses us with the topic today, Googling God, the challenge of spirituality in contemporary life, solutions, and aspirations. Welcome, Rabbi Glasser.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is so wonderful to be here again this morning, and it's also bittersweet that I have to fly home. Not just because I'm going back to cold weather, but it's been such a warm and beautiful Shabbos. You really spoiled me, and I don't know how I'm going to go to other communities now. I'll start with Brooklyn, but it's really just been such a beautiful Shabbos, such a beautiful Shabbos, and I just want to thank everyone for making me feel so at home, and Rabbi Yasker for his amazing leadership and hospitality, and his just to hand over your shul for a Shabbos is such a gracious and a beautiful opportunity for myself, and of course to Rabbi Kranzler, who's just been the host of all hosts, and I really deeply appreciate it. Thinking about hiring him to just to come with me everywhere. Where's Rabbi Kranzler? There you are. Yes, I already told him that my next shul contract, he's negotiating for me. I already told him, I emailed the president, this is the guy, you'll talk to him, whatever he says, we'll go. It's, as I start moving towards the Be'ezus Hashem, making my way back home, I'm thinking of the fact that I was talking to my wife. She's like, when's your flight? And I'm telling her when I'm coming home. A number of years ago, my wife actually went on a trip herself. And there's an enormous difference between when husbands go away and when wives go away. Okay, when she went away, she left me, I kid you not, It was a 12-page, single-spaced, double-sided manifesto on how to run our home. It had a carpool matrix. It had a very complex algorithm of when you go to the pediatrician and when you call. It had probably 15 phone numbers for anything that could possibly go wrong, who to call, what to deal with, and how to handle it. And I was thinking to myself, what would such a document look like if I wrote it for when I leave the home for the weekend? And it would basically be a text. Dear Ruth, lock the door. Love, Yaakov. But this is the world, so she really gets the credit for holding the fort while I'm away. I want to introduce today's topic with an experience I had a number of years ago when I was the regional director at NCSY, and I was running a convention of 300 Jewish teenagers. And the convention took place in the Catskills at what in some civilizations can be described as a hotel. And we get to this hotel, and I don't know, the Catskills don't look like they used to. They're a little more Hasidish. And we get there, we get to the hotel, and the kids, it's 300 kids you're responsible for. So you put them in the rooms, and you set up the program, and you start everything going. And I come downstairs, it's like Friday morning. And I come downstairs, and there is this kid, Jason, and he is sitting at on the couch in the lobby of the hotel, and he's sitting there on his phone or his computer, maybe it was on the computer at the time, and he's clickety-clack just communicating with people online. So I walk over to him and I say, Jason, it's great that you're online. You have to validate everybody now, right? So it's great that you're online. It's wonderful that you have no personality. It's beautiful that you can't talk to anyone. But Jason, maybe you want to close the computer and meet a human being. You're at a hotel with 300 living teenagers. Why do you have to look at them on a screen? You could go look at the actual teenagers. You could look at the actual people. So he kind of blew me off. And I made my way to deal with something else with the program. I come back, and he's still on the thing. An hour later, he's still clickety-clack on the thing. I walk over to him. I said, Jason, man, it's been an hour. Come on, there's so many things going on. There's so many programs going on. There's so much to do. It's so stimulating. It's so exciting. Leave the computer, go talk to people at the Shabbaton. It blows me off again. Come back a third time. It's now like 2.5 hours into this. And I cannot take it. I said to him, Jason, go do something wrong. Go do something bad. Go get in trouble. Manifest some humanity. You're sitting here talking online, and there are 300 kids in this hotel that you could be meeting and talking to. And he looks at me and he goes, oh, no, Rabbi. Everyone I'm talking to is at the hotel. And it was then that I realized that here we were trying to create this spiritual experience for all these kids, trying to give rise to an opportunity for them to be able to connect in a meaningful and a transcendent way to their Yiddishkeit, to God, to each other, to our tradition, to our Masorah, to their legacy, what their future means. And here we were competing with so much, grabbing their attention and occupying their space. And so I want to begin actually with an incredible quote from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs Zatzal, of course, a towering giant that we lost not too long ago, because he frames the challenge of spirituality in our generation, Kedarko, the way he generally does frame everything, in the most eloquent way imaginable. Now, I want you to imagine that I'm reading it in an English accent, and then it's even better, right? Even better. There is undeniably something of a crisis in Jewish spirituality today. This is sad
when the
because
kids were using it, I'm sure that they used it for their needs, but I don't get it back to what the needs are.
Beautiful. It's like 2020. So, see, I'm also talking to people online. Beautiful. There is undeniably something of a crisis in Jewish spirituality today. This is sad because for many centuries, Jews were the God-intoxicated people. If there is a single sentence that sums up Jewish history, it is surely the statement of the prophet Zechariah, not by power, not by might, but by my spirit, says the Lord of the hosts. Jews never had much power, despite what the protocols of the elders of Zion might say. That always was a fantasy, nor did they have might. Christianity and Islam built massive, monumental empires, and Jews never did. What our ancestors had in full measure was God's spirit. They felt God close. There is something moving about the word Jews use to describe this. They call it the Shekhinah. It's usually translated as the divine presence, but it actually comes from the word shachen, which means a neighbor, somebody next door. This is how close Jews felt God to be. He is more distant than the furthest galaxy, but he is also closer to us than we are to ourselves. And then he writes in the next paragraph, and so it was for many centuries. And then something changed. Something too complex to be analyzed here, but at a certain point in the modern age, many Jews became ultra-rationalists. Everything had to make sense. They pioneered in physics, in medicine, in sociology, in anthropology, in mathematics and philosophy. They became the shapers of the modern mind, but in the process, man lost that sense of intimacy with God. That sense of intimacy with God that resonated so powerfully with our ancestors, giving them their sense of hope, courage, and singularity. No faith ever held God so close. Yes, we wrestled with him and he with us. We questioned, we argued, we challenged. We were not passive acceptors of our fate. But at the end of the day, it was never less a relationship. And this is one of the challenges that we face today. Because we live in an era, as we know, which has become so defined by aspects of modernity that make the notion of surrendering and being deferential to a transcendent being something that is so countercultural and sometimes even counterintuitive. To the point that people express the notion, I don't feel close to God. I'm doing everything. I'm performing all these mitzvahs, I'm enacting all these rituals, I'm embracing all these different opportunities, I'm listening to all these speakers, but when I am in my room, when I am in my space, whether it's within the contours of my tefillah, of my prayer, whether it's in my home, there is an elusive dynamic here that I just don't feel as a modern person, the way when I go out into the world and I encounter the visible and empirical realities around me that modernity has brought to us in our world experience. It's so hard to suspend that rational sense of mind and allow myself to entirely give myself to a spiritual being that is so difficult to capture and to understand. And there are many layers of our specific generation that make this even more challenging. And one of them is technology, because technology, as it has evolved and as it will continue to evolve, is intended to give us a sense of total control. The only thing we're not in control of is technology's control of us. But the notion that I can wake up in the morning and automate everything in my life, I can automate everything. I could set the alarm to do, and I can talk to the box and I ask Alexa, very nice, Alexa, please make me a cup of coffee. Alexa, please tell my wife I love her. Alexa, please tell my kids to school. Alexa, I mean, that's where we're headed. That's where we're headed. Soon you're not going to be able to have an Alexa. It's a violation of the Chayim de Rabbeinu Gershom not to be married to more than one woman. That's the way I used to feel about MapQuest, you know, that talking lady that told you where to turn. I used to feel like I need another one of these. It's like unbelievable. That's why I switched it to a different voice. So you know, we're being given a world where we're in control. The whole notion of spirituality And being deferential to a transcendent being is the notion that we're not in control. The notion that there is a providence that emanates from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that guides and navigates our life, that creates the context for the choices we make, but ultimately, that our lives are not just our own. And that stands in such stark contradistinction to the entire mentality that is being built in a generation that is being told, here, with this tool, with these tools, you can do anything. You can do absolutely anything. That notion of control. And there's another dimension of the modern world that makes spirituality very challenging. And that has to do with the concept of individuality. You know, when I was growing up, I'm like the last generation that didn't grow up with the internet. That's it. After me, like even like 5 years after me, they're all, you know, mush, right? I'm like the last one. And I remember when you wanted to listen to music, and I was growing up. So what did you do? You bought an album, and you put the album in whatever you were using. It could be a CD player. And you listened to the 12 songs of the album. Some of them you liked, some of them you didn't like, and you had no choice. You heard them all. By hearing them all, some of the ones you didn't like, you came to like. And some of the ones you didn't like, okay, that's the one we suffer through to get to the next one. And every once in a while, there would be like a best of album. And those were like very exciting. Billy Joel would put together an album of only the songs you really like. And we'd hack and we'd fight. How come this one got in and that one didn't get in? Or you would make, and I referenced this at dinner the other night. My kids looked at me like I was from Mars in 1930. A mixtape. You take the tape in one deck and you copy only the songs you want onto another tape. And you write on top of it, mixtape, right? And it sits in a drawer. You have your mixtapes. Today, you don't have to listen to anything you don't want to listen to. The ability to customize your life experience entirely based upon your own individual preferences. You know, I walked into Best Buy the other day. It was to get a Hanukkah present for one of my kids. You walk into Best Buy, and I met this gewaldige Talmid Chacham there named Keith. Okay. Keith says to me, can I help you? I said, I need a lot of help. I said, I'm looking for an MP3 player. I want to get one of these devices that my kids can listen to music on. He goes, oh, we have the best MP3 players. I said, I know, you're the Best Buy. That's why I came here. So I walk in and follow him into the aisle. And he says to me, here are the 2 songs. And I would never hit 20,000 songs. So I said to him, do you have people that run out of space when they fill up an MP3 player with 40,000 songs that they come in and they're like, I filled up the MP3 player. You got something with 60,000? Like you need the add-on? Like you need like what? And he said to me, no, you want to be able to feel like, you know, you have space, the store, what you want to store, and the files, and this and these things and those things. And I said, yeah, tape recorder, maybe I'll get that for the kid, you know? It's the notion of the ability to individualize and to customize everything is something that makes spirituality very challenging. Because spirituality is not just about what you want, at least our perception of spirituality. Our perception of spirituality is that what it means to connect to the Ribono Shalom is to connect to something else on their terms, on his terms. To surrender, to be deferential to a God on their terms. And now you're telling a whole generation, it's not just kids, it's us too. You're telling a whole generation that walks around all day with everything designed perfectly for us. And you're telling us that there's this like macro category out there called the divine, and everybody's got to kind of link up to it as it is. And this creates a tremendous challenge for ourselves to some degree, and certainly for the next generation, as we watch them really struggle with making ruchnius, with making spirituality the animating force of their religious life. They can handle many of the experiences, but you put them in the room and you say, speak to God. Speak to God. It's hard. It is very, very challenging. And that's what we're going to talk about for a few minutes this morning. So let's begin with the question, what is spirituality? We need a definition. We need to know what it is we're talking about. When I use the word spirituality, we probably all have very different conceptions of what that means, based on our own life experiences, based on our own education, based on different things that we've been taught and the things we've heard shared. So let's discuss, what does it mean to be spiritual, to connect to spirituality? So I want to share with you 3 distinct definitions of spirituality. And here is where we already begin to enter the solutions to this problem. To recognize and understand that there is not a monolithic conception of what it means and how it means to connect to God. In Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, another towering giant who we lost, Zatzal, we lost over the last number of years. Rabbi Lamb was, of course, the president of Yeshiva University, the rabbi of the Jewish Center, a tremendous, tremendous intellectual and Talmud Chacham. And he wrote many books. One of the books, so he wrote books that many of us are familiar with, Torah Ohr, other books. One of the books that he wrote that many people are not familiar with, which is an amazing work. It's a book on Kriya Shema. It's a book on the Shema, and it addresses the notion of spirituality. And in his definition, I want to share with you his definition of spirituality. By spirituality, I mean the intention we bring to our religious acts, the focusing of the mind and thoughts on the transcendent, the entire range of mindfulness, whether simple awareness of what we are doing, in contrast to rote performance or elaborate mystical meditations, that spells of groping for the source of all existence and the giver of the Torah. In his initial definition, Rabbi Lamb relates to spirituality as being mindful, being intentional, not living life just based on sort of like an automated reaction to things that are going on, or even a proactive, just subservience to ritual, devoid of any sense of presence of mind. For Rabbi Lamb, the notion of being spiritual is brought to the experience through the intellect, through the mind, through thoughts, through our presence. The difference between a spiritual prayer experience and a non-spiritual prayer experience is the cognizance with which we bring ourselves to the words of the tefillah. Are we just reading texts and reading words? Or is there a mindfulness? Is there an intentionality? When we eat matzah, are we just consuming something because it tastes delicious, right? And will inspire us in a very gastrointestinal way later? Or are we just eating it because that's the mitzvah to eat? Or is there a sense of presence and mindfulness? Why are we eating this? What is this about? Thinking about what it represents, what it symbolizes, what it embodies. What am I internalizing through the eating of the matzah? And that's all about a certain mindset. And that's what the Ramah writes in the beginning of Shulchan Aruch, the very beginning of Shulchan Aruch, that one of the things we have to do throughout our day before we introduce the code of Jewish law that delineates the myriad of expectations of rituals and activities that are supposed to be performed throughout the day, the first thing we have to affirm is our commitment to the notion of Shivisi Hashem L'negdi Samid. To have a certain cognizance and mindfulness and presence of Ribbon Shalom. And for those to whom connection to God resonates through the mind and through thoughts and through interaction of this type of cognitive presence, the dimensions of religious life that resonate as spiritual are those that have properties of intellectual components, of intellectual elements. So some people go to a shir or a daf yomi, and they sit and they learn for an hour the parsha, the daf, and they walk out and they're like, wow, I saw God in Torah. Because there was a certain way in which the experience activated, inspired the mind, and through the mind, one reached a certain level of transcendent connection, and they felt embraced by the messages, by the profundity of the ideals that are shared, by the nuance in the way the text unfolded, and the next person sitting next to them closes the Gemara or walks out of the shir, and they're like, okay, that was a nice idea. I feel nothing. I feel nothing. For some people, the portal through which they can engage the spiritual world of the Ribono Shel Olam is through the mind, is through the intellect. And then we have the second modality. And this is a quote from a hesped, from a eulogy, that Rav Soloveitchik gave, a tribute to the Rebbetzin of, a tribute that he gave to Rebbetzin Tursky, who was the mother of his son-in-law. And Rav Soloveitchik, in the hesped to her, spoke about his experience with his own mother. And the Rav writes in source number 4, the Rav writes, most of all I learned from my mother. That Judaism expresses itself not only in formal compliance with the law. Now understand who's speaking here. This is not just a Brisker. This is the Brisker. This is an enicle of Rav Chaim Brisker. The Brisker dynasty is the bearers of a Talmudic methodology which is defined by its hyper attention to intellectual acuity of analysis, of stripping everything away and just getting at the core of the conceptual constructs that relate the deeper wisdom of the Torah. It's a very intellectual approach. It's as far from the Hasidic approach as you can get. And wow, thank you so much. I don't want to destroy the computer. So the Rav writes, and the Rav was the towering intellectual, PhD from Berlin, University of Berlin. The Rav was, a philosopher. And he writes, most of all, I learned from my mother that Judaism expresses itself not only in formal compliance with the law, but also in a living experience. She taught me that there is a flavor, a scent, and a warmth to mitzvos. I learned from her the most important thing in life is to feel the presence of the Almighty and the gentle pressure of his hand resting upon my frail shoulders. Without her teachings, which quite often were transmitted to me in silence, I would have grown up soulless being, dry and insensitive. For some people, the portal to spirituality is not through the mind, it's through the heart. It's through emotions. These are people. And by the way, of course, they're not firm categories. You could have pieces of all of this. These are people who the sheer doesn't do it for them. But put me with a good song. Give me a good kedusha, where the music is coming together. Put me in a good concert. Give me a good kumsitz. I grew up like this. In NCSY, we're constantly using music. Huge piece of it was emotional. That was why I was so excited to take on the director of education role, because I felt that was a piece that was missing that we could bring to the experience. The huge, very emotional at the end of Shabbos, the whole Havdalah ceremony, and the kids, when they used to come to my own house for Shabbos, these non-religious kids, they used to come for Shabbos, and at the end of Shabbos, we would make Havdalah, and the kids would look at me, they're like, what's going on? And I'm like, listen to me. In my house, we don't have a band at the end of Shabbos. And we don't tell Holocaust stories before we make Havdalah. We make Havdalah and we fight over who's going to clean out the chulin pot. This is Orthodox Judaism. The notion that but emotion, some people connect with emotion. Some people connect with experience. I remember that when we were, I mentioned, I think Friday night, a couple of years ago, our family took an RV trip across the country. Rented a 30-foot RV, left Passaic, New Jersey, and drove across the United States to Los Angeles. It was an amazing experience. One of the highlights of the trip was and I never saw this coming. And even my teenage kids, I had 3 teenagers in this RV, so I mamish didn't know anything, right? I had 3 teenagers in this RV, and I expected they would enjoy. We went to Indianapolis, and we saw the raceway, and we went to St. Louis, and we went in the Arch. I figured they'd love all of that stuff. But when we got to Utah, and it was all national parks, I figured this is going to be like the end of everything. We have to just, I don't know, we'll go whitewater river rafting or something like that. But it turns out, I don't know if anybody here has been there. We went to this place called Bryce Canyon. I don't know what Hashem was looking. I don't know why he put this in Utah. This is the big Shiloh. I mean, it's just it is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen in my whole life. It's awe-striking. It's just unbelievable. And so one of my kids had hurt their foot. So my wife took the 2 other kids, three other kids down into the canyon, and they went hiking, and I stayed up at the viewpoint with one of the kids. And one of the things I like to do is I like to watch people. I like to appreciate people. So we're standing there and we're watching. This is the spot. It's called Sunrise Point or something like that. And this is the spot where people walk up, and you stand on this spot and you can see the whole thing. And one after the other, every single person who came up onto this spot to see the vast beauty of Bryce Canyon, every single one, from the biker gang Chevra to the Utahnians, every single one of them had the exact same reaction. They looked out and they said, "Oh my God." Some of them had a nusach that had the word holy, but for the most part, "Oh my God." And I'm standing there and I'm saying to myself, how many of these people are God-believing people? How many of these people, statistically speaking, if you're standing in America and you're looking at 100 people, what are the stats? How many people are actually, God-believing people? And how many people are basically either agnostic or they don't believe in God at all? And every single one of them had the exact same reaction when they saw this scene. Oh my God, you could not see it. Because there was something within the depths of their soul of who they were that recognized that certain things are beyond the scope. Even Elon Musk cannot make Bryce Canyon. And there's certain things that are just beyond the scope of human ingenuity that just reflect a designer of the universe that you can't miss, you cannot see it. So there's another portal to spirituality, and that's through emotion, through the heart, through experience. And finally, the third is expressed through the pasuk V'atem adveikim b'Hashem Elokeichem chayim kulchem hayom. And this is the notion of an existential sense of connection and attachment to something greater. What we call dveikos, not the songs, but the concept. Dveikos comes from the word davek, which means to attach, to glue. A sense of connection that's not through the mind, and not through the heart, but through the soul. A just more soulful sense of recognition and awareness of connection to God. And you meet these people also. For them, it's not the learning, and it's not even the kumsitz. It's a meditative ability to just connect to something greater than themselves. And Rav Soloveitchik has a beautiful thought. As a child, I used to feel stimulated, aroused, and deeply inspired. I used to experience a strange, peaceful stillness. As a child, I used to surrender using the language of the mystics to a stream of inflowing joy and ecstasy. This, by the way, describes my childhood also. In a word, as a young child, I felt the presence of Kedusha on these nights. Paradoxically, I must say that these emotions and experiences, however naive and childish, have always been the fountainhead of my religious life. My religious life has always been a colorful life. This achievement I derived from my childhood experience and not from my intellectual accomplishments. The notion of feeling this transcendent connection to something greater. So what is spirituality? It's not a singular notion. And when we talk about, I don't feel spiritual, I don't connect spiritually, we have to identify what are the portals of connection. And there is in our tradition a range and diversity of how one connects to the Ribono Shalom. One can connect through the mind, one can connect through the heart, and one can connect through the soul. And different people are predisposed to different modalities of connection. And sometimes what ends up alienating people from God is that their whole life, or certainly in the formative years of their life, somebody tried to impose a framework of connection that was antagonistic to their unique individual predisposition. So you have kids that grow up in school and we're told, learn. And they can't, by the time school is over, they cannot wait to get out of this thing. And they have and you're sitting there and you're like, 12 years of yeshiva education. And you don't have emunah, you don't believe, you don't feel, you don't connect, how is that possible? Of course it's possible. Because for some people, the modality of connection is intellectual. And for some people, it's emotional. I love music. My whole family's musical. My father's musical. I'm musical. My kids are musical. Music is huge in our family. And when I lead singing in our shul, they know already. They make fun of this already. I stand up in the middle of the circle. My whole shul is basically one big NCSY Shabbaton. I stand up in the middle of the Shalosh Shudas circle. It's not a circle. I stand up in the middle of the room on Shalosh Shudas and I say to everyone, we're going to sing now. So for those who want to sing and connect to God, please join us. And for those for whom something is wrong with you and you don't like singing, please be quiet. And they know there's an understanding here, because that's how but you know what? I've come to understand not everybody likes singing. Some people love a good Kedusha singing, some people don't. My father, and many of you know, is a chazan. I was telling this to somebody the other day. So when I interviewed for my shul years ago, I showed up to the interview and they said, oh, Paul Glasser's son, amazing. Do you daven? Are you a chazan? And I said to them, I'm not a chazan, but I could sit in the back and make fun of the guy for doing it wrong. That I know how to do, It's different people connect to different things. And that's part of it. And here's what's fascinating. The Rav himself, who was such a deeply intellectual, emotional, and spiritual human being. Rav Soloveitchik himself, in a fascinating essay that was actually compiled by his son-in-law, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, writes, listen to this, the next time we're criticizing our schools, how come they don't do a good enough job? Well, I have succeeded to a great or small degree as a teacher and guide in the area of Gadlut HaMochin, which means greatness of the intellect. I have not seen so much success in my efforts in the experiential area. I was not able to live together with them, the students, to cleave to them, to transfer to them the warmth of my soul. My words, it seems, have not kindled the divine flame in sensitive hearts. It's difficult, it is challenging, because you can't teach spirituality. Because spirituality is not something that is external to a human being. Spirituality is something that comes from within. It comes when an individual is able to recognize for themselves what the proper pathway and portal is to reaching the Ribono Shalom. And herein lies the most important paradigm shift in how we think of spirituality. When people think of spirituality, we think of something external to us, something that's beyond us. I'm trying to connect to something over there. We're still operating with the traditional, more corporeal conceptions of God. God's up there in the sky. He's all the way up there and I'm down here. And to be spiritual means that I can somehow transverse this distance in experience and time and space and somehow connect to something up there. That's being spiritual. And if I feel there's a barrier, if I feel there's something disrupting that ability to create that connection, then that's undermining my spiritual growth. In reality, that is an incorrect paradigm. True spirituality is not about connecting to something outside of us. True spirituality is about connecting to something within us. When God created the human being, he created the human being with a soul. We have a body and we have a soul. And when we talk about what it means to connect to the Ribbono Shel Olam, to connect to spirituality, what we are relating to is the ability to live not only in our physical reality, but to live in the spiritual reality that exists within us. It's not something external to us. It's something that each and every individual can generate and reach on their own. The goal and the role of leaders and speakers and teachers is to create the context within which an individual can discover the spirituality that is unique to themselves. It is a highly individualistic process. It is not how we sometimes frame this like meta concept that you have to somehow connect to something bigger. It is connecting to the very individuality of your own spiritual dynamic. And in fact, there's a fascinating Mishnah, the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos tells us in source number 8, Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe got the Torah from Sinai and Masral Yoshua. He gave it to Joshua, Joshua to the Zakanim to the Nevi'im. The whole story of how we pass the Torah down from generation to generation. Asks the Maharal, listen to this, in the 16th century. Asks the Maharal, each one of these stages of tradition have a Masoretic giver and a Masoretic receiver, right? Yehoshua gives it to the Zakanim. The Zakanim give it to the Nevi'im. The Nevi'im give it to the Anshe Chesed, except for one. Which one? The first one. It doesn't say, asks the Maharal, Moshe kibel Torah me HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It doesn't give us the originating entity that gave the Torah to Moshe. Rather, it tells us the geographic location. You should know, where did this happen? This happened at Sinai. And the question asked the Maharal is, this is very important that Moshe got the Torah from God, because that speaks directly to the veracity of our tradition. That's how we know that what we believe and what we practice is Torah Sinai, is Torah from God. Why doesn't the Mishnah say, Moshe kibel Torah me'HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Moshe got the Torah from God? Why are you leaving God out of this? Listen to the answer of the Maharal. It's going to blow your mind. The Maharal says, the reason why the Mishnah was not formulated in that way is because if it said that Moshe got the Torah from God, then everyone would assume in perpetuity that the only human being on the face of the earth who could get the Torah directly from God is Moshe. And after that, there is basically a game of generational telephone. Moshe takes the information and gives it to Yoshua, and he takes the information and gives it to the Zakanim, and he takes the information, gives it to the Nevi'im, and down and down and down to Rabbi Soloveitchik, to the Rabbi, to Yaakov Glasser, to his children. And it's basically a game. Remember the game of telephone? You tell one person one thing, and then, by the time that person tells that person, the final thing is nothing like what you said. That's the game of telephone, or in the rabbinate, having a conversation. So what happens? So you're going to convey the notion, says the Maharal, that the only person, and that's not true. And now listen to this. The way the Jewish Masorah works for the Maharal is not a game of generational telephone. It's not that I have a set of data and information that I'm supposed to give to the next generation. Oh no. My job is to create the context within which the next generation themselves can connect to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. In other words, Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe got the Torah from God at Sinai. And then Moshe facilitated that Yoshua could get the Torah from God. And Yoshua's job was to facilitate that the Zakanim can get the Torah from God. And the Zakanim's job was to make sure that the Nevi'im can get the Torah from God. And my job is to create the circumstances and the context and the inspiring environment and motivation so that my children not want to hear from me, but want to hear from the Ribono Shalom. Spirituality means not just taking information. Spirituality speaks to the individual nature of how we as people, and so therefore the way in which Torah manifests itself in the context of my life and my soul may be very different. When we go to sleep at night, all our souls go up to heaven. And when we wake up in the morning, we're told, we say, Modeh ani lefanecha melechai b'kayom she'achzarta bi nishmasi b'chem l'rabba emunasech. We thank God for returning us our souls. That's what we do when we wake up in the morning, or in shul after the, after sometimes in my shul sometimes I hand out negovasser after the. I once told the people in my shul that on Sukkot, a rabbi really shouldn't speak on Sukkot because you're not allowed to sleep outside of Sukkah. So maybe people are going to fall asleep and I'm going to cause them to do a sin. But then I remembered that if you're in pain, you're patur from the sukkah. So therefore, I'll just speak longer. And this way we avoid any halachic problems. Anyway, they found me as current residents for sukkahs. So so that's what it means to have a moment of Mesorah. And it's fascinating. There are actually studies of children and spirituality done in the secular world. You know what? We're not the only ones trying to pass on a value system and connection to spirituality in this world. There are many people that are trying to perpetuate to a next generation. I'll tell you a funny story. I was once taking a train to Baltimore, and I got stuck at some station, and I sat down with a cup of coffee, and there was only one table, and I was sitting there, and a guy came and he sits down, and we started talking, and I said, "What do you do?" He said, "I'm a minister." So I said, "Oh, I'm a rabbi. Let's find an imam and go to bar." No. So I said to him, "This is what we do." So we sat down at the table, and we started schmoozing. So I said to him, "What's your greatest challenge in the church?" So apparently they don't have boards in the church. So I said, "What's your greatest challenge in the church?" So he says to me, "The challenge we have is holding on to the youth, spirituality of the youth." So he said, "What's your greatest challenge?" I said, "We also have that challenge." I said, "Let me tell you something that we do in our synagogue. We have something called a teen minyan." And I explained to him that we have the kids running the service. They're laning, they're reading the Torah, they're speaking, they're leading the prayers to teen minyan. He goes, "That is the most brilliant thing I have ever heard. I am going to start a teen minyan." And there is some church in Virginia, and he calls it a teen minyan. There's some church in Virginia. Right on the side, they have a teen minyan, they have kiddush afterwards, they have little mezainis, they have some wine, and they're holding. So there are studies that discuss the different ways that parents can convey spirituality to children. And there is a fascinating discussion in one of the journals where they discussed what is called bidirectional reciprocity. What does that mean? That means that instead of having a set of dogma, a set of principles and ideas that you're just trying to hand over to the next generation, there's a certain reciprocating dynamic. There's conversation. There's discussion. There's also learning from them. Oh, wow, I never thought of it that way. There's a notion of learning from them. There is cultivating and nurturing the individuality in the child's search for Torah. Finally, we see this notion of individuality. It also arises, of course, in the story of the very first member of the tribe. Who's that? That's, of course, Abraham Avinu. The Torah tells us that Abraham Avinu, Hashem comes to Abraham and he says to him, "Lech lecha me'artzecha." So asks to go away from your home and go to Israel. So all the commentaries ask, who is this guy? Who's ever heard of Abraham? Well, you don't even tell us who he is. When we introduce Noah, he's a tzaddik, he's a tamim, he's a darosov. This is what happened. Who's Abraham? So the Rambam tells the whole story from the Medrash. Abraham grew up as an idolater, and of course, the way you knew he was going to become Jewish is because his father wasn't just an idolater. He knew how to merchandise and make money on idolatry, right? So he already had a store, and it was wholesale, and he already knew what was going on. So he already planting the seeds, right? And so, you asked Herach, how's business? Thank God, right? So he comes along, and he says, right? And Abram starts thinking and questioning what's going to be. What are we going to do? How is it going to be? And he goes on this whole journey. And the question is, why isn't this in the Torah? Why isn't this whole story in the Torah? If I was writing the Torah, I would include how the very first Jew discovered God. Why are you including that in the Torah? And there are a number of answers to this question. But perhaps one of the most profound answers to this question is the reason it wasn't included in the Torah is because if it was, everyone would assume the only authentic pathway to discovering God is the way Avram did it. Philosophical questions, intellectual questions. But if for me, Judaism speaks more emotionally, more experientially, more mystically, so that's somehow a diminishing and watered down, diluted form of spirituality. So the Torah left it open because everyone gets to find the path their own way. And so the notion of individuality is at the core of how we should be perpetuating spiritual connections. Helping people, helping ourselves to take a moment and to think to ourselves, what inspires me? What awakens me? What makes me feel like I can accomplish something and do something? And finally, I want to end with one final point. And that is, we live in a very consumer-driven world. We expect to be able to go into a supermarket, right? We're not dealing with a big challenge because there aren't 24 types of ketchup. There's only 16 types of ketchup because it's stuck in the port of Los Angeles and the crates because China and this and that. We live in a very consumer-driven society. And very often, we take this same attitude towards our spirituality. We expect others to inspire us. We expect others to arouse a sense of connection within us. Ruchniya's spirituality is ultimately about becoming not a spiritual consumer, but a spiritual producer. We have the ability to create spirituality. And the way I know that is because, and you'll remember we discussed this a couple weeks ago, the way I know that is because the most iconic object of spirituality in the entire Jewish tradition is what? Is a Sefer Torah. If you have a Sefer Torah and you lay it out and you have a machine come and write every letter, every word of the Sefer Torah from Bereshis Bar Elokim to Einei Kol Yisrael, and the whole thing there is written, and it's all sitting there, and it's an amazing Sefer Torah, and that Torah gets lifted up at Hagbah and falls on the floor. What do? We kiss it, and we put it away. It is a chomesh. It is a chomesh, because to be a Sefer Torah, you have to have more than just cloth, parchment. You have to have more than just ink. You have to have more than just words. You know what you need to make a Sefer Torah? You need a Jew. You need a human being. Says the Rav, you need to infuse the personality and individuality and spirituality of the human being into the carcass of that cloth. You need to create Kedusha Sefer Torah. To create the sanctity of Sefer Torah, you need to create it. You need a person has to elevate it. That means that we all have within ourselves the capacity not just to experience spirituality, to create spirituality. And that is why perhaps the Sefer of Shemos that we're in the middle of right now, it's fascinating. Shemos has the whole story of the liberation of the Jewish people and then the receiving of the Torah. Great. It should end there. But then there are another 20 chapters. About what? About what? About the tabernacle, about the Mishkan. Where should those chapters be? They should really be in the next book. They belong with the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, that has all the laws of the sacrifices. Put the building and the sacrifices in the middle book, and let the Shemos book be about the experience of liberation and receiving the Torah. Suddenly we get so nitty-gritty, and this thing, this tabernacle, we read it like 9 times. Wow, I'm thinking about building a tabernacle. I'll tell you all the details. And I'm going to tell you to build a tabernacle and hear all the details. Then you're going to build the tabernacle, hear all the details. And let's talk about how we built it and hear all the details. Like, unbelievable. It's like God switched from divine to rabbi. It's like on over and over and over the same point, non-stop, these details. And the hooks, you got to put the hooks and the planks and the place. None of us even know what this is talking about. Why is that in the book of redemption? And the answer is because redemption and the receiving of the Torah were spiritual moments that we were passive to. They were things that happened to us and towards us. What the Mishnah tells us is that we also have the capacity to not only receive spirituality, but to create it. We can create a physical space in this world where God's transcendent essence is manifest and present and experienced. We can do that. That is part of redemption. Part of what it means to be a Jew is not to just do everything we were told to do. That's Kabbalah Satorah. Part of what it means to be a Jew is to create the spaces and the contexts and the experiences where that can be internalized and transform us, and elevate us, and connect us to a larger world. So the solutions to spirituality are not found in gimmicks, and they're not found with one suggestion for everyone. They're found in a recognition of the nuance and complexity and individuality that exists in how we relate to spirituality. To take a step back and to first get to know ourselves. Who are we? When we receive that soul at the beginning of the day, who are we? And it's amazing because the Medrash says that Hashem gives everybody back their soul and doesn't mess up any of the souls, which is good because you don't want to wake up with somebody else's soul. You want to wake up with your soul, right? I want to wake up my soul. I don't want to wake up with someone else's soul. Maybe Rabbi Kranzler, he's got a pretty good soul, right? But I wouldn't want to wish my soul on him because then you're going to have a lot to deal with, right? But you know, we don't want to. We want us. And that's the first thing we say when we wake up in the morning. Shechzarto bi nishma si. Thank you for making me. Let me figure myself out. Who am I? And through what portal of connection can I cultivate and nurture my sense of connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And with that, ultimately, we can grow in our spirituality and model, as the Rav said, to others and to other generations what it means to grow in spirituality. And with that, Be'ezus Hashem, we will all be able to find our way to a redeemed world. Okay.
What a powerful, powerful speech. Let's give another very big hand to Rabbi. Rabbi Glasser, you make my job very difficult. You know, already I've had people coming over to me say, how are you going to beat this next time? So you may have to come back for another round. I just want to remind everybody that all our sponsors and donors have food upstairs at this point. Those who want to eat upstairs can eat upstairs. It's all packaged, or you can take it home. But anyway, I want to thank all of you for making this weekend a wonderful experience. I was very concerned because of what's going on, and you made life a lot easier for me. Thank you very much. And again, I'm hoping you're very welcome. It's really my pleasure, and I thank you all for being here today. Shema.